Welcome everyone to this webinar on house hunting for a warm home. My name is Marta and I'm a project manager at Students Organising for Sustainability UK. One of our projects this year is called Homes for City, and the reason we're running it is because we want to support students in their private rented homes, particularly when it comes to energy efficiency and making sure that everyone is safe and comfortable and warm in their home, because we know that for a lot of students this unfortunately is not the case. So we know that lots of students have to lower their heating level to a level that's not warm enough for them, that they are uncomfortable, and that they experience a lot of issues such as damp and mold and condensation, and a lot of these problems stem from the fact that unfortunately, a lot of the housing stock in the UK is very old, very leaky, and it's not kept in the condition that it should be kept in. So the best thing you can do to try and protect yourself from that is try and find a home that doesn't have those kind of structural issues that will then bring you problems later on in the particularly autumn-winter heating season. So in this webinar, we will cover things to consider before you even start viewing homes at all, specific things to check on while you're doing viewings, and ideally those viewings should be in person, so you're able to actually see things with your own eyes rather than through a camera. So I'll mainly focus on things to do with energy, just because that is the focus of the project, but also mention some other things that are worth checking, just so you don't get caught out at any point. And then finally, some things to bear in mind as you're signing for a house, just to make sure that everything is in order. So first things first, what to consider before you even decide whether you want to view this house. So the first thing to think about is what kind of home it is. So properties that share walls or ceilings or floors with other properties, so things like flats or terraced houses or sometimes semi-detached houses, they will be a bit easier to heat, and because of that also a bit cheaper, and that's because if a flat or a house has others attached to them, that means that other people heating their homes above, below and next to yours will support your home remaining warm. So heat retention will be better, meaning that will be less expensive to keep the flat or the home at the temperature that you want to keep it at. And essentially the more detached the property, as you can see on the graph below, so the more external walls it has, the more energy it will need to have it heated. Also, you should check your insulation, so things like wall insulation, also what kind of windows the property has, and I'll mention that later on as something to look at when you're doing a viewing. Smaller properties, also worth noting, will be cheaper to heat than larger ones just because there is less air involved. But a caveat to that point is that having more housemates, so by definition needing a larger home, also means splitting bills between more of you. So there are pluses and minuses, and I'm sure you'll be able to find a happy medium. But just a little bit more about the graphic you can see, just so you see how that's relevant. This is the median gas and electricity consumption in 2010 by property type, about domestic consumption. Obviously it is 12 years old now, so it's likely changed slightly, as I'm sure a lot of people have installed some kind of insulation measures in their homes, and also some energy habits might have changed, but it's a good representation of the range. So you see that flats use a lot less electricity and gas than a detached or a semi-detached home does. The next thing to think about is checking the Energy Performance Certificate, or the EPC. The EPC is a document that every rented property has to have, and it gives information about the energy efficiency of that property. So any property that's on the market to be let, regardless of whether it's a student property or not a student property, it must have an EPC that is up to date. And the EPC must state that the energy efficient rating is at least E. So the energy efficiency on the EPC is rated on A to G. So A is very efficient, G is inefficient. And the document will also tell you how costly it will be to heat and light the property and what the carbon dioxide emissions are likely to be. An EPC also includes information on what the energy efficiency rating could be if some recommended improvements were made, and also highlights cost-effective ways to achieve a better EPC rating. So even if you rent your home, you could still potentially implement some of the improvements that are noted on the EPC. So things like switching to more efficient light bulbs. So that's always really helpful to have. You must be able to see an EPC free of charge before signing any of the documents, but also just a note that you can find an EPC for any property online as well through a governmental system, and the link to that is just on the slide, and I'll be putting that into the YouTube description of the recording of this webinar as well. There is a different register in Scotland, so just bear that in mind. But an EPC is an excellent place to start looking, and the higher it is, the closer to A it is, the better it will be for you and for your bills and for your comfort at home. So now we got that out of the way, let's talk about what to do during the viewing. So first thing I want to just say, don't be embarrassed about doing or asking any of the things that I'll be talking about. The viewing is there for you. It's not there for the landlord or for the agent. It's there for you to figure out if this home will be one that you will be happy in. And you should be asking all of these questions, because at the end of the day, you need to know the answers. And whoever is showing you around should be able to answer them. So first of all, check for damp. So damp refers to the presence of moisture, water within a property. It can lead to an issue of mold in the home, and that can be very damaging for health and for belongings. And we know that around a third of students report experiencing damp or mold and condensation in the current accommodation in the private rented sector. So it's very, very common. Ideally, you would avoid signing for a property that you can see has an existing damp problem. And there are ways to check for this during the viewing. So essentially, if you can see damp during the viewing, it is highly, highly unlikely that it won't be there by the time you move in, or that it suddenly won't be a problem unless some major improvements are made. The only thing to remember in terms of damp is condensation. It's one type of damp that you shouldn't be very scared about, because a lot of it can be managed with just how you use your property, so making sure that you air it. So if you can see some condensation on the windows, that's not too bad, because it might just mean that the current tenants don't air the home enough. But if you see any of the signs, the telltale signs of damp on the slide, so if you can smell anything that's musty, if you can see a wet mark that's rising from the floor or the skirting board that looks kind of like a tide mark on the beach, or any kind of blotchy patches of crumbly plaster on the walls, some damp marks in corners of the ceiling, particularly in the corners, but also generally around the ceiling and where it meets the wall, any large pools of water on windows or on windowsills, and in particular any kind of fuzzy looking black, grey, green spots on surfaces, that's particular kind of walls, ceilings and corners. Try and avoid that property if you can, because those are signs of larger issues of damp that have to be managed by the landlord or the letting agency, and if they're not being managed at the moment, then I'm afraid you will most likely have an issue trying to get them to sort it if you end up moving into a house like that. The next thing to do is checking for drafts. So essentially, if you have a draft in your home, you're very likely to feel cold in this house, especially when outside temperatures drop, like at the moment, you know, we're in the very low kind of 2-3 degrees Celsius. If there is a draft in your home, that air will be coming in and bring that coldness with it. And if you can feel a draft or see a draft anywhere in a property as you're viewing it, that also means that it's quite leaky. So when heating comes on, a lot of it escapes through those gaps around particularly doors and windows. Which means that it's not going to retain the temperature. And if you want to keep it at a specific level, you will have to have the heating on for longer or more frequently. And that's, of course, potentially risking higher heating bills. And also, some drafts cause absolutely infuriating humming. So that is generally just not good for you, for how comfortable you feel in home if there's just like a constant annoying noise. So that's another thing to bear in mind and why we want to avoid having drafts in the properties that we rent. So how do you check for drafts? First of all, you do a visual inspection of the windows. So look for any gaps that you can see from the outside. So any of the areas as you like looking. So as much as obviously you are viewing the inside of the house, you should also have a look at the outside of the house as you do it, and just make sure that it looks in order. So from the outside, what you can see, so most likely ground level, look for any areas where the caulking has been broken and revealed air gaps next to the window frame, or any signs of, for example, a bay window structure coming off the rest of the house. Inside, check the ceiling around the windows. So have a look at if there are any gaps or any breaks in there. And if you look at the photo on the slide, you can see that the bottom of that door will definitely be bringing some kind of draft inside that property. And another thing to do is using another one of your sensors. So touch, run your hand around door and window frames slowly along the perimeter of the interior of the door. If you feel a breeze, however small that breeze is, it usually indicates a draft. Drafts also aren't always from standalone gaps or breaks. Sometimes they are there because windows weren't sealed tightly enough, and the sealant is just like quite loose. So even though it looks fine, it might not feel fine. So make sure you always do that check with your hand as well. And it looks a bit funny, and I'm sure you'll feel a bit weird doing it, but you will thank yourself for having checked for those drafts, I can assure you. Next thing to do is unfortunately unpleasant, but if the property that you're renting has a cellar, go down into the cellar. Most likely, if it's like a terraced house, there will be a cellar somewhere. Unless it's completely inaccessible, go in there. And there are a few reasons why you need to do that. So first of all, energy meters are usually in the cellar. So when you move into the house, you will need to be able to read them, and ideally read them regularly, unless you have a smart meter in the house, just to submit those readings to your energy supplier so that they bill you correctly and that you don't have to pay too much for the energy, and you actually pay for the energy that you use rather than what the energy company thinks you're using. And you will need to read them at the end of the property as well, so no one bills you for any energy used after you've moved out. The meters are usually in the cellar, so go down there, check that they're accessible. If it's a pain to get to them, it's more likely than not than you won't want to do it, and you might have to pay estimated bills, which are usually higher than bills from readings. And another thing to do in the cellar is check whether it's insulated. So look up at the cellar ceiling. We want to see something similar to what you see on the photo on the cellar ceiling. So it might be pink or it might be yellow, but basically some kind of mineral wool or some kind of other insulation at the top of the cellar, just to insulate that area that's usually cold, and particularly if it's not been converted into a room and not being used regularly and it's not being heated. If that area is really cold and there is no insulation that separates it from the rest of the house, the room above it will get cold as a result as well. And another thing to do is check for damp specifically in the cellar. That is very often an issue, and sometimes a house can look fine and then the cellar is damp, and that can bring issues, particularly when it's uninsulated, so when nothing separates it from the rest of the house. because the smell and the cold and the dampness will permeate particularly into the room that's directly above it, which very often is either a living room or a bedroom, and no one wants a bedroom that's smelling of damp because of an uninsulated cellar. So as much as it's not a great thing, and sometimes it's awkward to get to, please check the cellar when you're viewing the house. The next thing is looking at the gas and electric. So checking if there is a valid gas safety certificate. Landlords are legally required to renew their gas safety certificate every 12 months, and tenants must get a copy of the certificate within 28 days of the gas safety check as well. At the beginning of your tenancy, you will have to, that's the very least, the very latest, you will have to have received a copy of the gas safety certificate. Check if the hob and the oven work. Silly, but please do try every single hob ring. Also think about what kind of hob it is, because obviously there are different types of hobs. So with ceramic, electric and induction, not all pots and pans work because they have to have a specific connection to be able to mate with those hobs to even warm the food up. Induction is a more efficient hob as well. It means that it uses less power and remains cold unless you actually place a pan on it. So it uses less energy than other types of electric hobs. And it's also a safer choice because there is no flame involved, of course. A lot of the hobs are still gas hobs. If it is a gas hob, check whether the ignition works on it or whether you'd have to use a lighter or matches. If you're used to using a lighter or matches to light your hob, that's fair enough. If you're not, and you end up with a hob that needs a lot of kind of assistance around trying to use it, you might find it really, really annoying later down the line. So just consider those things. And then another thing is, what kind of oven is it? Usually it's either going to be a gas or an electric oven. An electric oven, in my personal opinion, is better. So an electric oven provides kind of more even and consistent cooking. And the heat that it uses is drier. And also with electric ovens, it's possible to turn it off before you're done cooking and finish cooking your food with residual heat. A gas oven has to be on for the whole time of the cooking. So again, just something to bear in mind. Obviously, if you're a big baker and you have a preference for the oven for whatever reason, that's something else to consider, but that has nothing to do with energy efficiency. So I'll let you make that call. According to the wiring regulations for domestic accommodation, rented houses and flats, and also houses of multiple occupation, have to have the all of the wiring, the electric wiring, checked minimum every 5 years. A routine check should really be done every year, but at least within the last 5 years, there should have been a check done. So just make sure that has been done. And also ask what appliances are provided with the home. So for example, kettle, a toaster, a microwave. Do these things come with the house? And also, are they pad tested? So portable appliance and testing is the process of checking electrical appliances for safety. It's not a legal requirement, but it is definitely a good practice for landlords to be checking the appliance that they're providing to their tenants alongside all of the other documentation. Next, it's always good to ask about the heating system. So first of all, finding out whether it's gas or electric. Electric will be more expensive because electricity is more expensive than gas in this country, and particularly at the moment. Next thing is just like kind of figuring out how it generally works. So is it possible to set the heating on a timer, and is the timer available for more than one period in a day? So sometimes it's only possible to set the timer on the heating system on the boiler on one automatic time period, which unfortunately is very unhelpful unless you want the heating on for all day, but that would be very expensive. Or if you're out from really early in the morning until the night and you'd only like the heating on when you return. That's quite rare in households where there are housemates, because people usually have different schedules, particularly when you're students at university. So try and figure out whether it would be easy to manage the heating automatically or whether it would have to be done completely manually, and kind of think whether this would be feasible and something that either you are willing to take on or you're willing to agree on with your housemates. But it would just need a bit more of a hands-on approach to make sure that you do actually only have the heating on when you need it, rather than when someone accidentally leaves it on for all day and then you have a massive bill at the end of the month. Next thing is checking if there is a thermostat or where the thermostat is. Thermostats are really helpful because they essentially mean that the home will stop heating itself if the thermostat registers a specific temperature. So even if the heating is accidentally left on, the thermostat shouldn't allow the house to get warmer than what's on the thermostat. And that's really helpful, again, just to monitor the level of those bills. I think changing the temperature on the thermostat by 1 degree can change the bill by 10%. So that's quite a big difference. And it's usually best to set the thermostat around maybe 19 degrees to begin with. If you can go a bit colder, that's fine. If that's not warm enough for you, then you can always bring it up a little bit. But it's useful to have, and if you do have it, making sure that it's in a place that actually reflects the temperature of the house, if that's an option. And finally, checking if you have valves on all of the radiators and if they work. So again, very helpful for adjusting heating levels and making sure that no one's overheated in their bedroom. Very often, unfortunately, in houses, radiators don't have the valves, so it's impossible to control the level of the heating in the room. So just make sure that you find out if you can see the valves, and try and turning them. Obviously, don't change the temperature, particularly if you're viewing in the cold season, because I'm sure the current tenants have set it on the specific level for a reason. But just check if it works around, if it's easy enough to manipulate it, and if not, ask if that can be fixed. Very helpful, always a good question to ask is what kind of insulation the house has, because the house that's well insulated will need less heating and will stay warm for longer, just because that warmth will not go away, it will actually stay in the house. So some questions to ask would be if the windows have double or triple glazing, if there is loft or roof or wall insulation, and that's particularly I think important to ask for the loft, because a lot of the heat can get lost that way. Obviously, if you've seen mineral wool on the cellar ceiling, that's great. That's a clear sign that there is insulation of the cellar. If you can't see anything in the cellar, ask if there's maybe another type of insulation in place for the room above it, just so it doesn't get too cold from the floor up. And then finally, if there is a separate hot water tank, so if there are two things that look like a boiler somewhere, ask if it's insulated. So most of the houses currently have combi boilers that work for both heating and hot water. Sometimes you still find houses that have a separate hot water tank that stores the water for the taps. If that is the case, ask if that hot water tank is insulated. If it's insulated, that's great, because then the water will actually stay warm in the tank. If it's not insulated, the water will basically have to keep reheating itself, and then the boiler will keep firing up to reheat that water that's already in there, and that's just a waste of energy. So yeah, make sure that if there is that separate tank, that there is some kind of hood on it to keep the heat of the water in there. And finally, a final thing to check during the viewing for energy in particular is the curtains. Why? Because the curtains are actually a really good tool for adding that additional bit of insulation to the windows, regardless of what the windows are. And closing the curtains at dusk can reduce heat loss by around 15 to 17%. For blinds, the figure is kind of 13 to 14%, but it's still significant. And this is research done at the University of Salford. So it is for a UK home, the standard UK home. Essentially, generally, heavy curtains are better at preventing heat exchange between the cold air around the window and the warm air in the rest of the room. The best insulated curtains have a lining attached at the back of them, so on the side of the window, and that's designed to increase insulation even more, and also limit kind of airflow and noise transfer. And those curtains are sometimes also made blackout. So if you're, for example, renting a home that's right next to a street lamp, having a curtain that's thick enough will not only be helpful for you to obviously get that extra bit of insulation at the window, but also so that you are able to sleep and your room is not completely lit up if you have a bedroom that's facing that street light. So particularly for the bedrooms, check how thick they are, and if they're lined, and essentially the thicker, the better. Some other things to check during viewings that are not necessarily to do with energy, but still really important for you generally being able to use your home effectively and efficiently, and for it not to be super annoying every day. Plumbing. So do all the sinks, showers and baths drain quickly, or if they don't, it might suggest that there is a clog that would be very, very annoying. In the long run, to have to shower, for example, with water going up to your ankles because of some kind of weird clog or some kind of fault in the plumbing system. Make sure you try all of the taps. Check the water pressure, particularly for any showers, because it will get very, very annoying further down the line, to kind of just have like a very weak trickle. So just make sure that everything works. Does the toilet flush the toilet, and also check for any leakages around the toilet, around the taps, and also around the shower, because a leak in the plumbing system may seem like a small problem, but it also can develop into a bigger issue, because it attracts various insects, ants, centipedes, any further kind of signs of pests, and honestly, one leak in the plumbing system could be all it takes to get pests into the house. Pests love areas of stagnant water where they can hide, and when they get hungry, they will most likely find their way into the house, and that can cause structural damage to it as well. So check for any leakages, and also check for any signs of pests, so kind of any droppings or slug trails, or if there are any fleas in the house, because you don't want to be moving into a house that has a problem of vermin, and have that as the first thing that you need to sort out when you move in. It is a big pain, very, very annoying. Next things is security. So unfortunately, it's estimated that around a third of students in the UK become a victim of crime at some point while they're at university, and that is mainly theft and burglary. So ask about a burglar alarm, whether it works. Maybe do a bit of research around the area. You can always ask the agent or ask the people who live in there as well, and just get a bit of a feel, maybe walk around a little bit. Often, if it's a residential area that doesn't look like it's dominated by student housing, it tends to not be the target of burglars quite as often as an area that has student house next to student house. Checking the general security, so if all of the external doors are solid, do they have proper locks? So obviously the best kind of lock is like a 3-bolt one, not very common in the UK, but just making sure that the lock will actually work and it's not very easy to dismantle it. And another thing about the locks is making sure that one of them, that's not one lock for both the front and the back door if you're moving into a house, just because it's safer. If you lose your keys, again, would be possible to get in through one of the other doors. If your keys get stolen, for example, with one of the keys attached to them, that means that there's still another door that might not need the lock changing in it. And finally, check if there are smoke detectors and fire extinguishers and fire blankets available nearby in the kitchen in particular. Next, space and furniture. So make sure that you check if there are enough sockets in all of the rooms, particularly bedrooms. 2 is not enough. I will tell you that. Look for at least 4. And if there are not enough of them in each of the bedrooms, decide whether you're okay with that and whether you're okay using extension cords, or if you will find it a bit too annoying. Check if the house has enough furniture for the occupants, for like the number of people that will be living there, or will someone have to watch TV from the floor, for example, if you want to have a house movie night. Is there enough space in the kitchen for everyone to store and prepare their food, or will you need to take turns cooking? Also enough space for kind of crockery and appliances, so kind of thinking about the fact that it's not just going to be food stored in the kitchen, but also any plates, any bowls, any pots, they have to live somewhere. So just checking for that. Fridge and freezer, whether you will all be able to use it to the level that you want to use it, so at least one big shelf per person. Check if any of the furniture is the property of existing tenants, and would you feel that that item is missing if they move out with it? Would you be willing to purchase a replacement? Check the condition of furniture. So just, obviously wear and tear is fine, but you want to be able to use the furniture that's actually there and not be scared that, I don't know, a shelf will fall on someone's head when they walk into the kitchen. And finally, does the sofa meet fire regulations? So all sofas, regardless of what they're being upholstered with, they need a fire label to ensure that they meet the fire safety standards. The vast majority of sofas, particularly in rented accommodation, will have that label and will meet the fire regulation, but it's always good to check. If current tenants are in, talk to them. So, just ask them questions. What about their bills, what they've been paying, how they've been finding the heating. For example, if the house tends to stay warm, or if they have to keep putting it on regularly. Always good to find out what the relationship with the landlord or the agent of the property has been like, whether it's been easy enough for them to get in touch, if there are any issues, reporting problems, do problems actually get solved? Again, things like this really build up. And finally, good to ask why they're moving. So always good to find out if there is maybe a particular reason to do with a house that would be worth you knowing about. Obviously, if people are graduating, for example, or leaving on placement years, that's not a cause of concern. But if they're, for example, moving because the house is too expensive, you want to know this. And the final bit of the presentation around signing for a house. So first of all, verbal agreements do not count. So if you're doing a viewing and you think a house is great and you're very excited about it, and the landlord or the agent is promising any repairs or any improvements, any changes, which makes you feel like you would be willing to sign for that house, whereas without that, you wouldn't be considering it. Make sure that any promises like that are down in writing into your contract or as a contract supplement. If they're not down in writing and signed, your landlord and your agent have no obligation to get them done. Verbal agreements mean nothing. It's very hard to prove them. And again, same thing if you've agreed, for example, on specific dates to pay your rent by. So for instance, to do with your student loan, so that you pay in kind of bigger installments when the student loan comes in, or at some other date, so not by the first of the month, for example. Things like this, they really need to be written down and they need to be included in the contract. Otherwise, you have no way of proving that these agreements have been made. Deciding on bills included or excluded, there are some plus and minuses, so some things to consider. If you have bills included, that means that you would only be paying once for all of the rents and all the amenities, and that price should be the same every month. I'm saying should be the same because we are obviously currently living in an energy crisis, and the energy prices have skyrocketed over the past couple of years, in particular over the last year. So very often landlords and agencies give themselves some kind of leeway in their contract through like an energy usage cap or a fair usage policy, or any clause in the contract that say that the all-inclusive arrangement can stop. So put simply, a fair usage policy of the energy in the home means that your agreement is only all-inclusive up to the point where you exceed the usage that the fair usage policy believes is right. So the amount may be capped by units of energy used, or the proportion of rent that's allocated for bills. So for example, £15 per person per week. And then a landlord or agent can then legally charge you additional rent for your utilities. So cap that seemed reasonable at the time of signing might feel less favourable in future. So something to definitely bear in mind. Also, the rents included, the bills included with rent option is usually more costly because you are paying for the convenience of just having to have to pay once every month. And also, if you are not the one that has the name on the bill, you can't choose or change any of the suppliers. So if you have any issues with your energy supplier or any issues with your internet, for example, if you're not the person on the bill, you'll have to liaise with your landlord or the agent or whoever it is that is on the bill to change any of that, and there's no guarantee that they will be able to do that for you. So if the bills are excluded and you have to sort it yourself, obviously there will be a number of payments that need to be made every month or every quarter, depending on how you sort those bills, and the price can change. As you know, any kind of caps come in from Ofgem, the energy regulator, or the government, but that option is still generally cheaper than the bills included option. You can switch suppliers as you please, so if there's anything you're not happy with, you can always change that. But something to bear in mind, it can involve having to chase housemates to pay their fair share, which not great. But at the same time, eventually everyone will most likely have to pay their own bills. So you can, obviously there is a way to delay that if you move into kind of an all-inclusive house as a student. But I think this is a good opportunity, and this is my personal opinion, I think this is a good opportunity to try and kind of figure out how the bills work while there is someone else, most likely a housemate as well in your house, that would be able to take some of that load on, and it wouldn't just be on you. So some pluses and minuses. Obviously the decision is yours at the end of the day, and not all letting agents even offer the bills included option anymore, but if they do, think about these things. And finally, making sure that everything is correct and that everything that should be in your contract is in your contract. So that's the landlord's name and address have to be in there, all of the dates that they're correct, and all of the tenants' names that they're right, everything is spelt correctly. Make sure that you understand what kind of contract you're signing. So whether it's a joint or an individual one. A joint contract means that you are all jointly and individually responsible for the terms and conditions of the tenancy. And this means that one or all of you can be held responsible for the whole rent for the whole home. And it wouldn't be possible to argue that each tenant is liable for their particular share. So if someone you live with doesn't pay their share of the rent, the rest of you are responsible for making up the shortfall. And if you don't, you are all responsible for that, and the landlord or the agency may take action against you. So obviously this doesn't happen very often. Generally people pay their rent, particularly if they're sharing it with housemates, but just take that into consideration. If you are signing a contract that is a joint contract with all your housemates, if you are just signing a contract for yourself as an individual, if you don't pay your rent, that's it, that you are the only person responsible for your own rent, for your own share of the rent, and if one of your housemates don't pay, then that has nothing to do with you, and you're not responsible for that, and it won't affect your tenancy in any way. The only impact it might have on you is if one of the housemates wants to leave, and you all have separate contracts, then obviously they potentially would be able to leave, and then the landlord is likely to get someone new in, and it's not very common for the tenants to be able to kind of have an opinion on who that person is. So you might end up living with a random person if one of the individual tenants decides to change. And the final question to address is what deposit protection scheme is used in the contract. So all of the agents and all of the landlords have to place the tenant's deposit in a tenancy deposit protection scheme within 30 days of receiving it. There are 3 in England that are used, and I think it's just Scotland that has different ones. So I think all of the UK uses the same tenancy protection schemes other than Scotland. There are 3, and it just has to be named, so it's legit, and so you're able to refer to it. Finally, always read the contract before you sign it, all of the contract, all of the points, just to make sure that you're not caught up with any small print, any weird things, any weird agreements, someone asking you not to use the garden if the house comes with it. Make sure that you read it, and if anything concerns you, make sure that you raise it with the agent or the landlord, and that you get it changed if you don't agree with it, and don't sign something that you're not happy with. And as soon as you move into the house, do the inventory and make sure that anything that's an issue, so any problems, any stains, any ripped furniture, upholstery, any broken shelves, that anything is reported as soon as possible, so that you're not liable for any of it, and so that you get your deposit back at the end of your tenancy. So that's all of the advice for house hunting for a home. We have further advice available about private renting, and specifically aimed at private renting, and advice guides on our website. So again, I will be linking to that in the description of the YouTube video. If there are any questions, now is your chance to ask them, and I'm happy to take them. I think that's a no. So I will end it there, and if anything comes up after, you are more than welcome to get in touch with us. I will be sending an email with a link to the recording and anything I spoke about. Oh, someone's asked a question. Do you need a contract as a lodger? Not always, but it's always good to have a contract, just to make sure that both you and your landlord agree on kind of the way that you're living in the home. So if there's any expectation for you to, for example, take part in cooking or cleaning of the kitchen, things like that. So you don't always need a contract as a lodger, but you are better protected kind of in the law if you do have a contract. Oh, someone just wanted to thank me. No worries. I hope the resources that we have on our website are also helpful for you. Okay, I think I will finish it there. And if anything else comes up after, I am more than happy to answer it via email. So look out for an email from me with the link to the video and the resources in the description. Hope you have a great day.